Welcome back, and in this video we're gonna have a look at how we can add a function. So when we hover over a note on the fretboard, we will not only see that particular note, but we will see all of the notes, all of the Fs on the fretboard. So in the same way as we did before, we're gonna add a radio button up here, or actually a check mark. And when that is checked, we will, when we hover, see all the notes of the same kind on the fretboard. But before we move on, I noticed that when I hover here, I actually get if I refresh here and I get this sharps. And that's because I made a mistake in the code. So let's go back to the code and see. The thing is that accidentals are set to sharps from the beginning. And that doesn't make any sense because it's set as default to flats. So let's just change that. So when I go back here, reload, I should see flats to begin with, and when I select this one, I should see sharps. Yeah, so that's the little bug we fixed there. But let's get started on adding a new checkbox up here so we can see all the notes of the same kind. And let's go back to our code. In our index.html, actually I'm just going to copy this one, and after this, just going to paste it again. Because we need another checkbox. Instead of calling it this, let's call it show multiple notes. And I'm going to change it here as well. And here. Okay. I'm going to save that and go back to our browser and see if it works. We got it right here. Now it's not hooked up to anything, so let's do that in our JavaScript. In our app.js file, up here, let's make a new constant. You know what, I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy today. And then I can't even spell. So, show all note selector, let's call it, what should we call it? We should call it show multiple note selector. And multiple notes. Something like that. I'm going to save that. And then we want to add an event listener to that. Or actually, before we do that, I want to, right here, let's create a variable and let's call it all notes. Because we're going to need that later. We're not going to set it to anything to begin with. And let's create another one. And let's call it show multiple notes. And let's set that to false to begin with. Because that's not the first thing we want to do. So every time we change this, we're gonna change this to true and then back to false if you click the checkbox one more time. But yeah, we added these two variables now, and this one we're gonna use in just a second. So down here at our event listeners, I'm gonna add a new one to this. Show multiple note selector. Add event listener, and that's a change event. Okay, and the only thing we're gonna do here is take the show multiple notes that we set to false up above before, and we're just gonna use a negation operator. So we want to set it to the opposite. So if it's false, when you click on it, it'll be true, and vice versa. So if you click on it while it's true, it'll go back to false. And the way we do that is to use an exclamation mark or a negation operator like this. So it's going to be the opposite of what it already is right now. And that is possible because we're dealing with a Boolean. So the opposite of true is false, and the opposite of false is true. So we can just negate it like this. So I'm going to go not show multiple notes. Like this, and we can just try and console log just so you can see what I mean. Let's save that, go back to the browser and inspect and find the console here. Every time I click this, now we know it's false, so it's going to be true now. If I uncheck it, it's going to be false. True, false, true, false. So now that we are setting our global variable show multiple nodes to whether we want to show them or not, I want to move on and I want to add another method on the same app object here. So let's create a method that turns on or off all of the node threads of the same name. So I'm going to call that toggle multiple nodes. And in here, we want to get a list of all the nodes on the fretboard. And a way to do that is to go and use the, remember we have on up here, or let me just go to the browser actually and show you something in the elements here. We can target that inside our fretboard. We have strings, and inside every string, we have all of the different nodes have a class of node thread. All of them, it doesn't matter where they are. So we want to get a collection of those. So the way we can do that down here is we can set a variable. And actually, I already set that variable up here. I'm going to take this all nodes. And down here, I'm going to set that to document query selector. Actually, query selector all. And we're going to take all of the node threads like this. And what will happen here is that you'll get kind of an array. It's not really an array because you don't have all the methods that you would usually have on an array. But you will get a node collection, a collection of elements. So let's just try and console log this here. All nodes. Gonna go back to the browser, go back to the console, and in our app, I am going to toggle multiple nodes. Alright, you can see we get, whoops, let's go back to the console. Okay, you can see that we get kind of an array. It's a node list, as you can see, but it looks like an array. And we want to use that. It's an array with all of the different node names here, all of the threads and all of the strings, all of the different node names. We want to loop through this and find out if it contains the node name that we pass to this toggle multiple nodes method here. So the first thing I want here is actually receive a node name. And the idea is that every time I pass a node name to this, it'll either show or hide the dots with that node name. So we're going to accept another argument, and that's going to be the opacity of it. Because remember, the way we show and hide the dots is setting the opacity, the node dot opacity. Like here's an example right here. So we're going to do the same down here. Now we have the all nodes, and let's loop over that with a for loop. Let I equal 0, and as long as I is less than the all nodes length, we're going to increment. So I plus plus. So when we're looping over all of the nodes, we will check to see if that node has a data attribute. Remember, we had a data attribute called node, data node. We want to check if that is equal to the node name, because then if it is, we can set it to be visible, and if it is not, we can remove the visibility. We can make it invisible again. So let me go back to the fretboard in the browser, and let's just go to the elements, and let's remember we have data node here. So we have a collection of all of the divs with the class of node thread. And what we want to do now, we're going to loop through it, and we're going to find the ones that has a data attribute, data node attribute that matches the node name that we pass into this method. I hope that makes sense. So if all nodes, which is our node collection, and we want to get the ith element, and then we can check if it has a data attribute called note. And the way we do that is we type dataset, and we're checking to see if it has a data attribute of data note. So I'm going to go dot note. And then I can check if it has a note that is equal to the note that we're passing in. So that will be the note name that we're passing into this method. Okay? And we want to set the opacity of this particular node to either 1 or 0. So opacity up here can either be 1 or 0. If it's 1, then it's visible. If it's 0, then it is not visible. So we can type out here all nodes I, because that's the one we're dealing with, but only if it has the same node name as we're passing in up here, right? And then we can take the style and we can set a property like we did before. Set property, and the property we want to set is, once again, it's node.opacity. And we're going to set that to opacity, which can either be 0 or 1. Okay? And that's about it. That's all we need right here. So let's try and see if this one works. Toggle multiple nodes. Let me go back to the browser and play around in the console. We can go app, toggle multiple nodes. I'm going to pass in the node name that I want to show. Let's say we want all the D's on the fretboard. And we want them to be visible, so we're going to pass in 1. And nothing happens, we just get undefined, and I think that's because we have a typo. Yeah, I forgot to add a couple of dashes here. Okay, now it should work. So let's try again. I am going to run the toggle multiple nodes, and I'm going to look for all the nodes that are equal to D, and then I'm going to set the opacity to 1. I'm going to hit enter now, and we see all the D's. Let's try and see if that works with all the D flats. I'm going to add that one here, and we get all the D flats. Well, the D is still going to be here, but we can turn it off again. So let's try and do that. I'm just going to set this one to 0, and all the D's are off. And we can remove the D flats as well in the same way. Okay? So that's pretty neat. We're going to use this method to show and to hide the dots. So where should we call this method from? Well, if we go up here, remember we created 2 methods, one for showNode dot and one for hideNode dot. Inside this if statement, we are going to check if show multiple nodes is false or true. So if it's called show multiple nodes, and remember that's right up here. We set that to be false, and it'll change to true if the checkbox is clicked. So if that is true, then we want to toggle multiple nodes. So we're gonna go this toggle multiple nodes, and we're gonna send the event target dataset node, right? Because that way we will get the name of the node that we are hovering over. Remember, it's passing in the event up here, and then we get the target of that event, and then we check what the value of the data set or the attribute that has an attribute of data dash node, right? So we can send that to that one. We need to find out what else. We need a 0 or a 1, and in this case it's a 1 because we want to show it. And then I'm going to add an else statement here, because we only want to do that if that checkbox is checked. And then I'm just going to take this and move it up. Right? And that is probably not going to work, and I'll tell you why in a second. So let's go ahead and do this. Okay, I'm getting an error here. So it says this toggle multiple nodes is not a function. But that's because the context of this, we're using this here, is not the whole object that we're in anymore. Now it changed because we're inside an event list, or we're inside a callback function that runs wherever this event triggers. Then we cannot use this. we actually have to refer. There are different ways of doing this, but one of the ways we can just refer to the object that we are on. But that's a little JavaScript thing that's that you gotta get used to. So let's try again. Go back to the browser. Select show multiple nodes. And look, it's working. Or kind of, you know. Just gonna refresh again. Let me go to this F here. Oh, I have to click this first. Let me go to the F. And you can see it shows all of the Fs. If I go to G flat, it's gonna show that as well. But we also want to hide them if we're not hovering over them anymore. So let's go back to the code and do that. And that would be inside the next method here, hide node dots. We're gonna do basically the same thing here. We're just gonna set up the conditional here. So if show multiple nodes, if that is true, if that is selected in the checkbox, then we want to take this, basically the same thing here. We want to just take, to toggle them back to 0. Oh, I need a semicolon here. I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to put it down here. Where am I? Here. Okay. And then we are going to toggle that to 0, just to toggle it back. And else, we just want to do it for the single one. Okay. So let's see if that works. It looks like it works. Let's see if it works when I change the instrument. It does. The sharps. Change it to sharps. We're back in flats here. So it works. But there's one more thing that I need to address. And in our code, because every time we run this method down here, toggle multiple nodes, every time we run that, we go in here and we make a collection of all of the nodes that have a class of node thread. There's no reason to do that every time you hover over a node, because that's just waste of energy. So I'm going to take this one, and that's the reason I actually declared it up here, all nodes, because we're going to take this one and we're going to move it, and we're only going to set it when we set up the fretboard. So I'm going to delete it here, I'm going to cut it here, and then up in setup fretboard, we need to add it down here. I'm gonna put it right at the end, right at the bottom, because we haven't yet created the classes and the divs and everything. So we have to do it after they're created. So here, all nodes equals document query selector all node thread. I'm gonna save that and go back to our browser and just check if it still works. And it still works. So that is updated, so I can every time we set up the fretboard, and remember we set up the fretboard every time we change a fret, so it will be automatically added to the node collection every time we set up the fretboard. Then we only have to do it every time we set up the fretboard, not every time we hover over something. So yeah, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe and all that stuff. And in the next video, we are going to add the node names at the bottom here. So when you hover over those, you will see all the corresponding nodes on the fretboard highlighted. Let's do that together in the next video.